did something which he was able to override the laws of nature and made something happen. So the same as with Mashiach. If a person, I remember this is when it applies now as well, but I remember during the 6-Day War, I was going to different places. I was in Australia at the time and asking people to put on tefillin. It was after the 6-Day War. And this person says to me, how come we don't see miracles today, only in the olden days? So I say, what are you talking about? We just saw this incredible miracle in Israel where they were threatened by 3 countries. And we thought that Israel would just be swallowed up. And miraculously, in 6 days, the war was over, and it was a victory for Israel, and all the other positive things that happened. So he says, nah. And at that time, the general that won that war, his name was Moshe Dayan. So Moshe Dayan, he knows the enemy like his 5 fingers. He knew what he was doing. He was very smart. In other words, it wasn't Hashem that made a miracle, but the general was an amazing, smart general. You can say that about everything and anything. And one of the basic principles in Jewish belief is that everything is really coming from Hashem. Even a regular job that I have and I earn money, anything that goes on is really Hashem's blessing. But especially when we see a miracle, if there's something in me that's resisting to accept that it's a miracle, and I look for ways of explaining it according to the laws of nature, that means I'm lacking that true belief that Hashem is really beyond nature. That He created nature and He's not limited to the laws of nature. There was a group of students that came to the Rebbe. They had a professor who was connected to the Rebbe. And the students were interested in Judaism, but they weren't really part of it as much. And he brought them to the Rebbe and told them they can ask any question they want. This was many years ago, in the early years. So one of them said to the Rebbe, they say that you perform miracles. Is that true? Normal, ordinary people wouldn't say that, but they were asking questions as they're interviewing this rabbi. So the Rebbe answered, your question is really not about me. Your question is about the concept. Can it be that a person can perform miracles? So the Rebbe said, God is the one that created the universe. And He created all the laws of nature. So obviously He's not limited to the laws of nature. So if there's a person that is very connected to Hashem, then that person will not be limited by the laws of nature. Not because he's a Superman, but because he's connected to Hashem. And therefore he too doesn't have the limitations of nature. Someone told me that he had a guest. He had a friend who had a guest, actually. And the guests were from France. It was a son and a father. And there was a story behind it. The father was unfortunately diagnosed with lung tumor, unfortunately, and the doctors said the situation is very critical. And one of the things they told him was that he's not allowed to drink any alcohol. And came Shabbos, he would drink grape juice. His son was learning in the yeshiva in Morristown, and when he came home for Pesach, he said to his father, let's both go back to New York, let's go to the Rebbe, let's get a bracha, because he was very sick. And the father agreed. So he came in for Pesach. He wrote a letter to the Rebbe about his father's condition, everything that's going on. Of course, as the Rebbe for blessing, he said, my father is here now. A few days later was the Farbrengen. This is the Farbrengen gathering that the Rebbe has at the end of the Yom Tov. And at the end of Yom Tov, the Rebbe, that's called Sudas Mashiach. The Rebbe requested everyone should drink 4 cups of wine. So middle of Farbrengen, the Rebbe turns to this person, his father, and goes like this. Should say l'chaim. So first they didn't believe the Rebbe was talking to him. There's thousands of people there. But then when it was obvious the Rebbe means him, he says to his son, I can't drink wine. Is there any grape juice? Grape juice. There's no grape juice, only wine. What do you do? And the Rebbe's waiting. It's disrespectful. Okay, he drank a little cup of wine. The Rebbe goes like this. Not a little cup. Big cup. Big cup of wine. How can I do that? The doctor said that it's like poison for me. But the Rebbe's waiting. Okay, he drinks a cup of wine. Rabbi goes on to speak. A little bit later, he turns to him again. Another one. Basically, he had him drink 4 cups of wine. Drank 4 cups of wine. And after the Fabring was over, as soon as the Rebbe walked out, he collapsed. Rushed into the hospital. And the son, was telling the doctors that he just drank a lot of wine, he has this condition, and he's very worried. Anyway, doctor examines him, comes back an hour later with a smile, and says, nah, he's okay, he just drank a little bit too much, that's all it is. What do you mean he's okay? He has this condition, and the doctor said this, then. Our x-rays didn't show anything about a condition. Anyway, they got the x-rays from France, and they compared the 2 x-rays. Over there is a tumor, and over here, there's nothing there. And the doctor said, we can't explain it, but we did this x-ray, they did another x-ray, there's nothing there. And they realized that this must have been a bracha, a miracle, that it's gone. They were excited. They wanted to go back to the Rebbe to thank him for the blessing. So the Rebbe was walking to his room. They were standing there, and they wanted to say thank you to the Rebbe. The Rebbe smiles at them and says, so the doctors in America are better than the doctors in France, right? In other words, you can easily, and the Rebbe said it in a humorous way, but a person could always say, oh, it was a very good doctor. No, Hashem brings the bracha. And therefore, if I believe that when the world will change and Mashiach will come, it's all Hashem. So if he made miracles then, and he will make miracles in the future, why can't I believe he'll make miracles now? So if a person says, I believe in Mashiach, but I just can't see it happening now, basically they're saying that my belief in Mashiach is a little bit weak. That's what it means. So therefore, we need both things. Number one, to believe in Mashiach's coming. Number two, to anticipate his coming. So there's a famous song that everyone sings, that this song probably has 600,000 different tunes. The words, Ani Mamin B'Amuna Shleima, I believe. So the words were composed by Rambam Maimonides, and the words are, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach, and even in the coming of Mashiach, the person, and even though he may be delayed, I still believe that he will be coming. I anticipate his coming. You had this in the first page of this booklet, if you remember. This was the number 12. Achakale. So the whole point, I wait for him. I believe there'll be a person that'll take us out of Golos. Okay, so now the question is, where is it in the Torah itself that the Torah speaks about Mashiach? In the prophets we see it, but where is it in the Torah? So he says like this. He's going to bring 3 sources. This is number 1. It says, God will bring back your captivity, have mercy upon you. He will gather you from among the nations, even if you're the diasporas at the end of the heaven, meaning at the end of the world. God will gather you from there and will bring you to your land. Let's remember, this was being said when the Jews were in the desert. Nobody was dispersed. Nobody was in different places. They were all together in the desert. So this is all about the future. That there's a prophecy here that there'll come a time in the future that the Jewish people will no longer be in their own land and they'll be dispersed all over the world. But after that, will come a time that Hashem will gather everybody together and we'll be back in the land of Israel. So that's one source. And he says, these explicit words of the Torah, which clearly state that there's going to be a time of redemption, it includes all the statements made by all the prophets in the later generations. But we also find another place in the Torah, prophecy by Bilam. That's very interesting. Let me give out the sheet. Copy here. Andrew, you want to take it? Thank you. Bilam was a prophet, but he was a prophet from another nation, not a Jewish prophet. And he's the one who prophesied, and his prophecy is written up in the Chumash about the future of Mashiach. Interesting that should be the source. So the paper that you're looking at, is there any extra copy?
Yes.
I'll take one extra copy. So the paper you're looking at is from the Chumash, from the book of Deuteronomy. There's 2 extra copies. Everybody has? Okay. So it starts off on page 330. 330. Okay, go by the numbers because some of them are stapled in the wrong order. 337. On top of the page, you have numbers. So these are the words, prophetic words. And he says like this, I'm talking about verse, pasuk, Yud Zayin, 17. He said these words, I see it now, I see it, but not now. And then he says on top of the page 338, I perceive it, but not in the near future. So clearly it's a prophecy about two things. One of them it says, I see it, but not now. Obviously, but not so far away. The other thing he says, I perceive it, but not in the near future, but in the far future. So the Rambam says it's talking about two people that are considered sort of redeemers of anointed one. By the way, what does the word Mashiach mean, literally? Anointed one. One of the ways of appointing someone as a king, or appointing someone as a high priest, or appointing someone in other high positions was they used to take oil, specific oil, and put it on the person's head. And that was a method of bringing down the sort of empowering them to their position. So anointed one is what the word Mashiach means. So the Rambam says there are two people that we find that are called the anointed one. One is King David, who lived about 500 years after this or 400 years after this. And the other one is Mashiach, which is coming now, and that's thousands of years after this. So the first one was, I see him, but not now. That was alluding to King David. When he says, I perceive him, but not in the near future, that was referring to the second person that was anointed, and that's Mashiach. Then the second verse also says two things. Darach koichav miyakov, a star comes out of Yaakov, becomes Shevet Yisrael, and a staff rises from Israel. Two things, talking about two things. One that is compared to a star, and the second one that it's a ruler that's coming out of the Jewish nation. The star is referring to, alluding to King David. When it says there'll be a ruler, that's referring to Mashiach. And the reason is because in the times of King David, also the Jewish people were surrounded by many enemies, and they were trying to destroy them. And King David was the one that protected us. They fought wars, and eventually it became peaceful. You know, who was King David's son? What? Shlomo Melech. Why was he called Shlomo? Anybody know? He was peaceful, a nice guy. And King David wasn't a nice guy. Right. In his times, there was peace all over the world. There was no wars. King David fought a lot of wars, but he brought it to a point of peace. And who was the one who sort of had that peaceful era? That was King Solomon, Shlomo Melech. So the Gemara says the reason why it turned out that his name was Shlomo, it comes from the word shalom, and shalom means peace. So it was a time of peace. So what he's saying is that David HaMelech was the anointed one that brought us peace from those enemies, and Mashiach will bring us peace from the enemies at the end of the Golus. Then there's another pasuk. Again, each pasuk, each verse talks about two things, and the Rambam is saying that means that referring to King David and Mashiach, King David and Mashiach. And again, remember, Mashiach is a descendant of King David. He is the one that's going to restore King David's kingdom. So now let's go back to the Rambam. We'll read it inside. I just wanted you to see the Chumash, where it has at least 3 pages, where it has all the different things. So let's see the words. These explicit words of the Torah include all the statements made by the prophets. Mention is also made in the portion of Bilam, in which Bilam prophesies in the coming of the two anointed kings. The first anointed king is David, who saved Israel from her oppressors. And the final anointed king will arise from the descendants of David and save Israel from the oppressors in that time. I see him, but not now. This is King David. I perceive him, but not in the near future. This is the Messianic king. The star shall go forth from Jacob. This refers to King David. A staff shall arise in Israel. This refers to Mashiach. Anyone here heard the name Bar Kochva? We'll learn about it later. But Bar Kochva was a person that he was a righteous person, and he was so successful, also bringing the Jews to save them from the Romans and from the Romans, right? That Rabbi Akiva and all the great sages thought that he was Mashiach. His name was actually not Bar Kochva. His name was Ben Kuziba. But why do they call him Bar Kochva? In Aramaic, it means a star. And because it says here that Mashiach will be a star coming forth, I guess a star is a symbol of light and something which is very powerful and above us, so much exalted above us. So Mashiach is referred to, use it to a star. You know, in Yiddish, especially in Chabad, one of the names for girls is Sterne. Because the Alter Rebbe's wife was Sterne, Rebbe Rashab's wife was Sterne. Sterne is the Yiddish for star. In Yiddish, the word for star is Stern. It almost sounds like a star. So it's one of the words that allude to King David, to the idea of Mashiach. Then it says, the Mochatz Pasi Moav, crush all the Moab's princesses. This is King David. There's a story in the books of the prophets how the people of Moab were oppressing the Jews, and he saved them from those people. The Karka Kol B'nei Sheis, this refers to Mashiach. Elul from sea to the sea. Then there's another verse that says, V'aya Edom Yeresha, that's King David. V'aya Yeresha is the Melech HaMashiach. So basically, in the Chumash itself, it talks about two people that are called the anointed ones. One is Mashiach, and the other is King David. And therefore, that means in the Torah itself, there's a source where it talks about Mashiach. Now, the Rambam brings a third source where it talks about Mashiach. Similarly, in regard to the cities of refuge, it says in the Torah, when Hashem will expand your borders, you must add 3 more cities. We just learned about this in the Parsha. What did we learn? That in those days, Hashem said to designate 6 cities and a city of refuge. Remember learning about it? Which means if God forbid someone murdered another person, but he did it by mistake, it wasn't intentional. They killed someone. So a relative might want to take revenge and kill him. So if he runs to this city, he's protected, and the other person can't go into the city, can't touch him, and these are called 6 cities of refuge. Then it says, in the future, when Hashem will expand your borders, you'll add 3 more cities. So the Rambam says, this command was never fulfilled. Israel was never expanded, and we never added 3 cities. Hashem will not give us a commandment in vain. Hashem knows the future. So how could it be that it would say in the Torah that when you'll expand your borders, you'll add 3 more cities? It never happened. So clearly, what does it mean? There's going to be a time in the future that Mashiach is going to come. And not only will we be back in Israel, but our borders will be expanded. And in that time, we should be adding 3 more cities. I know what everybody's thinking. If Mashiach is coming, we need more cities for people that kill others by mistake. There won't be any killing then. There won't be any tragedies then. So if you look at the notes, you'll see there's a discussion about this. But one of the main explanations, simple explanation is the story of the Gemara, the Talmud, that one of the sages and another of the sages had a difference of opinion. One of the sages said, you're not allowed to study on Shabbos under a candle. Today we have electricity, but in those days where everything was candlelight, could you sit and study Torah by candlelight yourself? And they say, no. Why not? Because very often the flame, the wick, moves like the Hanukkah candles. You see the Shabbos candles, the wick goes down a little bit, it gets darker. We're used to it during the week. In those days, they would just pick up the wick, make the fire a little bit more brighter. So ordinarily you wouldn't do it at Shabbos, but if you're studying and your mind is very deep into what you're doing, so without thinking, your hand is going to fix it, and you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. So one of the sages said, I don't think you have to make such a rule that I'm not worried, it won't happen. Sure enough, one day he's sitting and learning Friday night, and as he's learning, it gets a little bit dark. So without thinking, he moved the wick, and he actually made the fire bigger, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So first of all, he publicized the story. Why would he publicize something that's embarrassing? So people should know that when the rabbis say something, just trust them and follow. And no one should think, okay, I'm an exception. And then he said, when Mashiach will come, in those days, you couldn't bring a sacrifice as atonement. So he said, I wrote down in my notebook, when Mashiach will come, I'll bring a sacrifice for this. Which means there's certain things that were done in those days that we can't do today. And the same as here, going to a city of refuge wasn't only a protection from a person who's running after me. Going to the city of refuge, which means I had to leave my home, move to a different city, was also a process of atonement, a process of golas that would be an atonement for killing somebody, unfortunately. So what happens to all these people that over the thousands of years, 2,000 years, that we didn't have it, how would they get atonement? So Mashiach comes, all those people who feel that their atonement is sort of not complete, they're going to look to go to these cities. So therefore, we're going to need more cities because of, all the people that are going to come back to life are now going to need to go to the city for their complete atonement. Well, they say there were two tailors who were having a discussion. And one said to the other, when Mashiach comes, we're going to make the most money because millions of people are going to come back. Everybody needs clothes. So we're going to have such a business like, so the other guy says, wait a second, you forgot, all the tailors will also come back to life. They'll have a lot of competition. So he says, yeah, but we have the latest styles. They don't know the latest styles.